And here's the thing, how many deaths are, and it's tricky to even ask this, how many deaths are acceptable to close down an economy? Because I hadn't quite realised the numbers, some of the numbers, when you break them down, involved in all of this, of course. And it's interesting what we're doing to the economy and the knock-on effects and the ramifications of what we're doing to the economy. I mean, if ever there was an example, we have to play you this. If ever there was an example of an Orwellian police state, it came out of Wales yesterday afternoon from the First Minister.
Pubs, bars, restaurants and cafes will have to close by 6 p.m. and will not be allowed to serve alcohol. After 6 o'clock, they will be able to provide takeaway services only.
That's Kim Jong Drakeford. He's the guy that runs Wales. We're stopping the alcohol and we're closed. Who closes a restaurant at 6 o'clock in the evening? Restaurants will be closed at 6. No, that's when, Kim, that's when they open, mate. That's when they open at 6 and no alcohol. These people are making this up as they go. So we know about that. But I'm confused. There's a genuine confusion here, a genuine question. So number 10 have been accused of running a brainwashing PR campaign after analysis of official data showed that only 4 NHS trusts in England are busier now than they were this time last year, despite warnings that the health service would be crippled by coronavirus without the revamped 3-tier lockdown system. Michael Gove sparked fury, of course, over the weekend when he claimed that every hospital in England would be physically overwhelmed by COVID without the government's new restrictions, as he tried to persuade MPs and the public to support the brutal curbs. Now, as we sit here right now, the Prime Minister, the Boris Minister, Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is addressing Parliament. He's going to sit there for probably, I reckon, close on 5 hours now, just taking questions from backbench MPs about the tier system, and then they will vote probably around about 7 this evening. But he's on his feet, taking questions back and forth. And I've got some confusion over this, and it's genuine confusion, because when I was reading the ONS statistics, the ONS is pretty much the envy of the world when it comes to how data is collated. There are few countries that are able to so swiftly and accurately provide data on things like COVID and all manner of other things in our lives as well. A friend of mine got a knock on the door from them quite recently. And hello, from the ONS. Do you want to be one of our, sample people on a whole raft of questions? He thought it was quite an honour. But here's the number that I think we have to keep in mind. And it's absolutely important, although I'm possibly going to blast away my own argument here. We talked yesterday about, police states and lack of liberties and vaccines and all sorts of things. And the nonsense of believing that this is all part of some bigger conspiracy. It isn't. So yes, have our freedoms been curtailed? Yes, they have. Are there things where you don't quite like the relationship we have with the police at the moment? Yes, that is absolutely true. The real question is whether that's an ongoing thing. If it's an ongoing thing, we have a problem. If it's a temporary thing, it's very, very annoying and it's counterproductive to a thriving economy. But it's not there's no big kind of Illuminati-like conspiracy going on, but you take the point. That was yesterday's discussion. But I get it. Right now, as we sit here, there are things happening that do feel Orwellian. I mean, when you hear Drakeford there, the guy in charge of Wales, saying no alcohol, how did you, on what basis did this little pipsqueak suddenly pitch up and decide that nobody can have a beer? And restaurants close at 6 o'clock in the evening. You can do takeaways. Oh, yeah, they should have a right royal bumper profit year on that. But this was the figure. And this is the figure that I think we should all be aware of. So figures for COVID deaths with no underlying health conditions, where no other underlying health condition was listed on the death certificate. So in layman's terms, perfectly fit people of a variety of ages, but mostly older. So the number for England and Wales, and I apologise, Scotland and Northern Ireland, but that's how these figures are collated, and I would imagine they are broadly representative of figures in Scotland and Northern Ireland too. So no pre-existing health conditions. Remember, we have had 58,448 deaths. So of those, 4,476 have no existing health condition. And you look at that figure and you think, we have closed an economy. Can you imagine me even uttering that phrase this time? Like, we've closed an economy. If you were just waking up from a long sleep for a year, you'd be saying, what do you mean closed an economy? Oh, you mean it's slowed down? No, literally closed an economy. Yeah, but not literally. No, literally. Yeah, but not literally. Yeah, no, literally closed an economy. People out of work. What do we got today? Debenhams, Topshop, the Arcadia Group. Just to add to that big old list, BA, Rolls-Royce. Lord knows how many eateries and food and beverage organisations, retail, the list goes on. And, the smart one is we haven't even started yet on what those numbers are likely to look like. The economy is going to shrink. It's not going to recover until 2025. 5 years. No, sorry. Scrap that. By 2025, Rishi Sunak told us last week, the economy will still be 3% smaller than it should be. So in 5 years' time, mass redundancies, mass devastation, huge mental health implications, unemployment like we haven't seen for 30, 40 years in this country. The NHS waiting lists, the destruction of livelihoods, ambitions quashed. I mean, I could go on with that list for the next 10 minutes and still not complete it. And we've done that because 4,000 people out of, 67 million or something? 4,000 people have died. 4,000. And we've closed an economy, destroyed an economy that won't recover. The nearest they can get to is saying we'll be 3% smaller even in 5 years' time. 4,000 people. 4,500. Now, you could have, on a bad year, you could have 10,000 people dying of flu, for goodness sake. I'm not suggesting that the viruses are comparable, but that I can't remember when the last bad figure was. Was it 2016 or something? There was certainly a figure where I think the deaths were 18,000 or something of flu. I don't remember closing anything down for that. It may not be as virulent, I understand that. It may not be as potent across the board, but nonetheless, pandemics happen in this country. 4,500. Economy closed, 4,500 people. But here's where I have the problem, and this is the bit I don't understand and why I need your help. So when I read stats that start off with only 4 NHS trusts are busier now than they were this time last year, I think, well, this just gets worse. I've got 4,500 people closing an economy, and the hospitals aren't even, they're not as busy as they were last year. There's only 4 that are busier than they were this time. 4. We've got hundreds of hospitals. Now, the problem is this, and this is, I absolutely genuinely do not know the answer to this, which is why there is a little bit of a privilege. There's a huge privilege in doing this job, by the way, because getting to talk about stuff that gives you the right royal hump and gives you brain ache on a regular basis, and being able to articulate that and sound off is fantastic. Couple that with the fact that people can call in and add and educate and inform. It's just marvellous. I never lose sight of that. It's wonderful, which is why I'm asking this question, because if you follow the science, follow the Boris, as it were, and we didn't have the tier systems, we hadn't had the lockdown, the figure that I'm looking at here, 4,500, could be 44,500. The figure for hospitals being busier than they were last year, that might not be 4, it could be 304. So does that mean, I hate to even ask it, does that mean that the lockdown is responsible for keeping these numbers down? Now, it would have an effect, as sure as night follows day. If you lock everybody away for 8 months, it's going to have an effect, right? There it is, 2017-2018 flu season, 22,000 associated deaths. 22,000 associated deaths. I don't know, I can't break that down to how many people had no underlying health conditions, but I would suggest it might be something similar to that. Once in a while somebody cops a bad one out the blue. What happened to Where's Jim? I haven't seen Jim for a while. Yeah, he died. What did he die? Flu. Flu? Died of flu? Yeah, got the flu badly. That does actually happen in this country. Now he's got the COVIDs. 0344 499 1000. So educate me here and anyone else that's scratching their head on the same point. So on the face of it, the headlines are ridiculous. We've closed an economy because 4,500 people with no underlying health conditions died of, where COVID was on the death certificate. But they had nothing else going on to suggest there could have been any other factor other than a genetic predisposition to a certain strain of pandemic, obviously. 0344 499 1000. So the smart money says what Boris Johnson is saying, what's implicit in all of those comments about the NHS, is that if you didn't lock down the economy, the 4,500 figure number that I'm giving you would be way higher, way higher. And those hospitals at the moment, when we look at this and say there's only 4 hospitals that are busier than last year, what's going on? Well, the Michael Goves of this world say, well, that's because we've got a lockdown. If we didn't have a lockdown, that number would be massive. It's only 4 because of the tier system that's coming in, or because of the lockdown. Is that in yet? This tomorrow, the tier system, right? Or is it the day after? Midnight tonight, right? Yes, so the 2nd, midnight tonight, you're in a tier. Some of us are in tier 3. It's not a good look. 0344 499 1000. How many deaths in that case would we have to accept to close down an economy? Because I think we can all agree, at the moment, the figure is 4,500. 4,500. If that is the case, then what would that number have to look like before? Because every one of those deaths is a tragedy. Nobody's disputing that. But this is planet Earth. Stuff happens. I mean, we have this, run away with this idea that, we are a globe, a planet that will have a pandemic every 20, 30 years. As sure as night follows day. It's part of being on Earth as part of the human race at this particular time in our evolution. Pandemics will come along. They'll be different in strain. They'll be different in their veracity. They'll be different in their potency. They'll be different in terms of how lethal they might be. Virulence changes. I get that, but that's just part of the gig, right? So there was a pandemic and some people died. We're scratching our head going, what's going on? Yeah, that is kind of part of the deal. Part of the exchange of being alive is that once in a while something bad might happen. All of those deaths are a tragedy. But what would that number have to look like before you suddenly went from being uncomfortable with the lockdown and going, do you know what? I think we need to do something about this. Because if that figure was 50,000 or 100,000, would we then start to say, you know what? Until we've got a vaccine, we've got to close up here. What does the number have to look like before we all unanimously support a rigid tier 3 lockdown?